Hi, welcome back to The Vulgar Skill. I'm Ryan Neal. Today we're going to be discussing Godinho's fifth rule, which is for when you are surrounded, how you are to proceed. So, he doesn't specify a starting position initially in this chapter, so I tend to go with the more common position that he uses. He does use one like this, but he usually specifies when you use it. Here, it gives you room to interpret, so like I always say with Godinho, when there's room to interpret, play with what works for you, be adaptable. That's what I always emphasize with my students teaching Godinho, and if you're following along at home, that's my advice to you, to truly understand what Godinho is saying. You gotta adapt and be fighting. So, we're gonna start here, and we're gonna throw a tajo. So we're gonna throw this four-handed cut, not hit the tree. I'm taking advantage of the shade because it's still pretty hot here in the Carolinas. So you're going to throw a tajo and you're going to step. So that if you start facing one way, you'll end facing the other way. And the tajo wheels around you to sort of clear space. So here. And then you end facing the opposite way. Then you throw another one, facing the other way. The edge alignment was pretty poor on that one. So let's walk back. It's very easy to turn flat early in this rule. Sometimes when I'm thinking, like if I'm trying to talk to you or do things, I'll tend to turn too early. Like I'll go here, my cut's finished, and then I'm turning flat to get ready. That's not gonna cut it when you're surrounded. No pun intended. You need to make sure that your cut really goes through, and your edge alignment should end once you've logically passed your opponents. You don't want to wind up flatting people. And when you do the rule faster, it should flow into the next cut. So I've gone here, I've gone through, throw a tajo that wheels around. Tajo. Now, once you've done 2 or 3 or 4, as Godinho puts it, and you want to go back the other direction. Usually you don't want to necessarily go back the other direction. When you're surrounded, you want to break free. You want to get it so that all your opponents are to one side, rather than trying to action hero it and fight while surrounded. This is really a rule that lets you clear space by whipping this across people's eye level, I'd say, because I usually go eyes even though he doesn't specify, because it has more of a psychological effect on your opponent to see something go across their face. So it lets you travel, and once you're free, go to another rule. Get your opponents in front of you rather than trying to keep fighting while surrounded. But let's say you have to keep fighting while surrounded. Tajo. Now, I want to go the other direction. Godinho has you throw a revés with the other sword to the other side. So I just left, throw a revés. And then you can just rechamber this sword and throw tajos going the other way. Trying to keep the edge aligned as best you can while stepping. And the revés, again, once I get to the line, if I want to go the other way, revés, and then tajo, tajo, and so on. And once you get more of a flow of the rule, the revés can almost kind of start your momentum the other direction. I've just thrown a tajo, I want to go the other way, revés, tajo, and you can chamber at the same time. Revés, this pulls back, this tajo comes forward with the step. So, that's the initial way he tells you to do the rule. Your feet the whole time, you just pay attention to my feet, are depending on what I'm doing, and throw a series of high, relatively natural stances. Don't be too upright because it's harder for you to turn, and still be powerful. It makes it easier to turn, like if you're doing like Shiné turns, kind of on a half point, where you're spotting each time, the turn can be very, very fast, but it's hard to be grounded enough to have power in the sword. If you can find a good mixture of speed of turn and speed of the feet, and being able to still be grounded, especially on a surface that's uneven like this one, that's the balance you want. That's going to vary with your individual anthropometry about whether that's going to be super high or super low, but don't be too high. Definitely don't be lock-kneed. All right, so he gives another example where you can do the same rule with a revés. And it's same idea, where you just throw revéses with each step, pivoting as you go. Now, what makes this a little harder is when I want to go the other way, I don't do a revés like I did with the Tajos, I got to throw a Tajo. How do I do that? So, there's a few ways you can do this. I favor, as I know I want to go back the other way, I let this kind of come open to this kind of open position. This is ready to cut, this is ready to cut, and then I just chamber this cut ready to go. Usually I do a full cut with a full chamber here because I'm not fencing one person, I'm trying to make space. So you can afford a bigger chamber here. And then this cuts. You notice how the cut, when I cut, makes a good swooshy, sword-windy noise, so I know I did it right. And then it naturally propels me back into my revéses, however I want to do them. And that's another variant that you can try, by the way, is wind up chambered over the arm, and then cut these revéses, and then just swap them out. Like you've learned in previous rules where you've done kind of cutting patterns like this, you should be able to now kind of get the swords out of the way if you practice them enough. The last note he makes on this rule is don't thrust unless your opponent is pressing you. So usually you want to keep the swords fleeing wide, because if I just focus on one person enough to thrust, there's a point where I'm not making a wall of steel around myself as I move, and I'm more vulnerable. But if everyone's kind of pressing on me from the sides, I may need to thrust to get out. So what I do in that particular instance is, how do I want to show this one? If I want to throw Tajos, and I want to thrust out, he says you thrust, and then you rip with Tajo and revés. So what does that mean in this context? It's a little unclear. But there's a few ways I've interpreted this. Usually once I get to here, and I want to throw a thrust, I throw nails down, and then I Tajo revés, like so. Or I throw them bigger. So if I want to make it, for example, against an opponent where I just want to clear the space, I'm really getting pressed and I want to break out. Once I've completed my Tajo, I will thrust nails down, and I'll usually let this one kind of travel over my arm. Nails down, and then just either revés and Tajo and then just drive through. Similar to what we've seen in the previous rules. Let me get more in the view of the camera. I'm ready to thrust either with this sword or with this sword. I could thrust and then drive through. Or I could thrust really with the nails up, nails down. He also doesn't specify. Either way, what I want you to focus on with this particular interpretation of the rule is after you've gone through and you need to, let me do one more so I'm facing you, either thrust with this sword, Tajo revés, swap the arms like you have in other rules, or thrust here, Tajo revés, and the bottom sword leads. Or you could thrust, you could make the cuts bigger. So thrust, and then I'm going to throw like a revés and really pivot through. I'm beating the crap out of this tree today in this video. But in general, and I stress this in every video, adapt to your circumstances. Whether it be I finish my rule and I want to just thrust and go through this guy and walk through, or I want to thrust and I want to clear the space as much as I have to. Adapt to your circumstances, because Godinho doesn't specify. The only thing he specifies about the thrusting variant of the rule is that they're pressing you. So if you shank the person and they drop, and there's more people that aren't quite close enough, whip it around. If you really need to break free, thrust, then move the swords, go through them. So, to review, for the rule that's surrounded, you can turn with Tajos, cutting a reverse to go the other way. You can turn with reverses, cutting a Tajo to go the other way. And you can clear the space with a thrust afterwards. What the big emphasis I have here too is if you are surrounded, don't stay surrounded. Godinho doesn't specify this explicitly, but this rule is good for clearing space. But if you, I'll put the swords away for now, if your opponents are surrounding you and you can make a wall of steel, just keep going, or whichever way you pivot that flows with your cuts and where you need to go, that's good. But eventually they could time you, they could figure out where you're going to go, and if you fall into that kind of mindless rote repetition of the pattern, you're gonna get got. So the entire time you're working this, eventually pick a point in your drill where it's like, okay, I'm gonna break the drill, I'm gonna break out now. Or if you have to stay surrounded, say you're guarding someone, you will have to use another rule. Eventually, you've got people backed up and you're going to have to switch to a guarding rule or something like that. So, I hope you enjoy your practice, and I hope this is productive for you, and I hope you have a great day. Thank you.